From Washington, this is VOA News. The UN Health Agency says Ebola outbreaks in Nigeria and Senegal appear to have stopped. And Ukraine says a lasting ceasefire in its conflict is preconditioned on a complete pullout of Russian forces. I'm Michael Lipin reporting from Washington. The World Health Organization says Ebola outbreaks in Nigeria and Senegal appear to have stopped. The WHO's Africa office says there have been no new reports of Ebola cases in Nigeria since September 8th, and no new cases in Senegal since the country reported its first and only Ebola case on August 29th. But a separate report by the UN Health Agency says the virus is infecting more people in Guinea, Liberia, and Sierra Leone. The WHO report says the total number of Ebola cases in West Africa has risen to 5,864, while the number of deaths has increased to 2,811. The Ukrainian foreign minister says a full withdrawal of Russian forces and heavy weapons from eastern Ukraine is a precondition for a sustainable ceasefire with pro-Russian separatists. Speaking at the United Nations in New York on Monday, Pavlo Klimkin told reporters that Russia has to show political will to enable a lasting truce in Ukraine's conflict. Klimkin said other preconditions for a ceasefire include Russia closing its border with Ukraine and the release of Ukrainian hostages held by the separatists. Well, Moscow has consistently denied having any soldiers inside Ukraine or arming the pro-Russian rebels. This is VOA News. The leader of Syria's main opposition coalition is urging Western powers to carry out airstrikes against Islamic State fighters in his country. U.S. President Barack Obama is considering expanding U.S. airstrikes on Islamic State targets in Iraq to include the militant group's forces inside Syria, but he has not set a timeline for such action. VOA State Department correspondent Scott Stearns has more on the Syrian opposition figure's appeal from the United Nations.
Syrian opposition leader Hadi al-Bahra says the international community must act quickly to prevent civilians threatened by Islamic State fighters in northern Syria.
We must begin airstrikes in Syria immediately, as we speak. Hundreds of thousands of civilians in northern Syria, in Kobani area, Ain al-Arab area, are trapped in brutal siege by ISIS. Time is of essence to avert catastrophe.
More than 130,000 civilians have fled that fighting in the north. Protecting civilians threatened by the Islamic State in Iraq was the initial justification for U.S. airstrikes there. And Syrian opposition leaders are hoping President Obama moves quickly to expand attacks across the border, where opposition forces are fighting both the Islamic State and forces loyal to President Bashar al-Assad. Scott Stearns, VOA News at the United Nations.
Cambodia's International Tribunal says the next phase of a trial of two former Khmer Rouge leaders will begin on October 17th. That date will mark the beginning of the final phase of the trial of Nuon Che and Khieu Samphan. The two defendants face charges related to a wide range of alleged crimes committed when the Khmer Rouge ruled Cambodia in the 1970s. The alleged crimes include abuses of inmates at detention centers and work camps, government policies such as forced marriage, and the genocide of Cham Muslims and ethnic Vietnamese. Thousands of Hong Kong students have begun a week-long boycott of classes to protest Beijing's decision to rule out fully democratic elections in the former British colony. College and university students from across the territory streamed onto the campus of the Chinese university on Monday to kick off the boycott with a massive rally. Organizers said the protesters were angered by Beijing's decision in August to rule out open nominations for candidates seeking to become Hong Kong's first directly elected chief executive in 2017. China has said potential candidates must first be vetted and receive majority approval from a committee filled with pro-Beijing members. I'm Michael Lipin in Washington.
That's the latest world news from VOA.